On the coldest nights in hollow pines, when the wind howls like a dying scream and the moon hides its face behind a veil of black clouds, the stories begin. They speak of children, pale, silent, and strange, who appear at your door, their crimson eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. They knock softly, ask politely, and wait patiently for you to let them in. But those who open the door, they're never the same again. The winter of 1987 was one of the coldest ever recorded in Hollow Pines, a secluded town tucked deep within the Appalachian Mountains. Snow piled high along winding roads, and the forest that bordered the town looked like a sea of skeletal fingers reaching skyward. Hollow Pines was quiet that year, eerily so, as if the landscape itself held its breath. And then, the encounters began. It started with Ellie Drummond, a widowed schoolteacher living alone in her small cabin at the edge of Cedarwood Forest. She'd always been attuned to the peculiar silence of the woods, but something was different that night. A sharp knock came at her door just past midnight. Ellie hesitated before approaching the door. Her heart pounded as she peered through the frosted window. There stood two children, no older than 10. They wore strange, antiquated clothing, tattered wool coats, scuffed leather boots, and threadbare scarves. Their heads were bowed, and she couldn't see their faces. But what struck her was the crimson glow faintly emanating from beneath their lowered hoods. "Miss, we're lost. May we come in?" one of them asked, their voice cold and hollow, like wind howling through an empty canyon. Ellie felt her stomach twist. Instinct screamed at her to bolt the door, but a sense of dread rooted her in place. "Where are your parents?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They'll find us soon," the second child said. "Please, let us in. It's so cold." Ellie's hand reached for the lock, but her eyes caught something. The snow around their feet wasn't disturbed. No footprints, no sign they had walked through the thick drifts. Her instincts won, and she turned the lock. The children didn't knock again. Instead, they stood silently for several minutes before vanishing into the black forest. Ellie didn't sleep that night. The next sighting came 2 weeks later. Mark and Linda Evers, a young couple renovating an old farmhouse, were awakened by a faint scratching at their window. They lived miles from the nearest neighbor. Thinking it was a tree branch, Mark went to investigate, but froze when he saw two small figures standing on the porch. "Linda, call the police," Mark whispered, backing away from the window. The children hadn't knocked or spoken, but merely stared up at him. Their eyes, two burning crimson orbs, pierced through the darkness. Before Linda could reach the phone, the power flickered and died. The house plunged into a suffocating silence. Mark returned to the window, but the children were gone. Only then did they hear the sound, faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the roof. The couple spent the rest of the night locked in their bedroom, clutching each other as the tapping continued until dawn. The next morning, Mark found faint handprints on the frost-covered windows and roof shingles. By January, the entire town whispered about the red-eyed children. Some believed it was a prank. Others thought it was a warning or even an omen. Sheriff Clayton, a no-nonsense man nearing retirement, decided to investigate. He followed reports of strange sightings to Black Hollow Road, an abandoned path deep in the woods, said to be cursed after a mining accident decades earlier. As Clayton drove deeper into the forest, his radio crackled with static and his headlights dimmed. Suddenly, two children stepped into the road. Clayton slammed on the brakes, his truck skidding to a halt mere feet from them. They didn't flinch. He stepped out, flashlight in hand. "What are you kids doing out here?" he barked. They didn't answer. Instead, they raised their heads. Their faces were pale and expressionless, their eyes glowing red like embers. Clayton reached for his sidearm, but the air around him grew heavy. A low hum filled his ears, drowning out his thoughts. The flashlight flickered, and in the brief moments of darkness, the children moved closer without walking. Terrified, Clayton stumbled back into his truck and sped away. When he reached the station, he found long scratches etched into the hood and doors of his vehicle. By February, the encounters stopped as abruptly as they had begun. No more children appeared at doorsteps, on roads, or in the woods. Hollow Pines returned to its eerie quiet, but the fear lingered. Ellie Drummond moved out of her cabin, unable to bear the oppressive silence of the forest. The Evers sold their farmhouse, abandoning their dream of restoring it. Sheriff Clayton retired early, haunted by nightmares of glowing red eyes. Years later, rumors still circulate about the children of Hollow Pines. Some say they were spirits, the restless souls of miners who died in the cursed woods. Others believe they were something far older, drawn by the despair of a dying town. Whatever they were, one thing remains certain. Those who saw the red-eyed children never forgot. Even now, on winter nights when the wind howls through the trees, the people of Hollow Pines swear they can hear faint knocking and see the distant glow of red eyes watching from the shadows. They say the red-eyed children haven't been seen in years, but on quiet, moonless nights, the stories still linger. Some claim to hear faint knocking on their doors, a soft voice carried by the wind whispering, "Please, let us in." And if you're brave enough to peek outside, you might just catch a glimpse, a flicker of crimson eyes staring back at you from the shadows, waiting, always waiting.